Adam, it's so wonderful to be with you here today. Thank you so much for letting me talk to you.
Thank you so much for coming up here to talk to me. And thank you guys all for coming here to listen to us. It's really lovely to see you.
Yes. One of the main ideas in the work of art is sort of your interest not only in products, but in process. Mm-hmm. That there is something about the way a work of art comes together that enthralls you. And so before we get started, I would maybe love to hear a bit of transparency on your end about the process of how the work of art came together. Just like, how did you come up with this idea for a book that would talk to, several artists about how their maybe exemplary works came together? What was the process that brought this book to life?
Okay, I was a magazine editor, as you heard in the introduction, and I quit. And in 2019, and I had started a little bit to paint before leaving my job. I was like, I never had any background in painting, but I've always loved the visual part of a magazine, and so I started to paint, and I was terrible at it. And it really frustrated me. And I felt that more than skills training, what I really needed was some idea of how artists think. I needed to get entrance in a way to the artist's head. And so I looked for a book that would do that for me, and I couldn't find it. So I eventually decided that that's what I would do. Even after telling myself that I would never write, because I hate writing, I decided, I just find it so painful. I decided I would try to write this book. And I was a little bit worried that when you talk to artists, and by artists, I mean the book covers painters, visual artists, sculptors, poets, novelists, songwriters. Pretty much, I'm extremely liberal with what constitutes art. But I was worried that they would go off and be kind of gassy, as creative people can be, because it's so hard to talk about. And I wanted to tether their own ideas of what makes them move through a project to something that would ground them in something honest. And so I came up with this idea that they should take me through a single work. And then also, I was still worried that what they would say would be inauthentic. And so I've always had this fascination, I mean, as you say, with process, but also with process artifacts, by which I mean all the things that Maria Popova mentioned. Doodles and notes and crazy outlines and lyrics, scribbles on a hotel stationery, and I thought these are honest documents, and that they would be true maps of how the artists worked through the thing. So together, that became the idea, that I would make a book. The book would sort of look a little unlike other books in the sense that it would sort of bring to bear a lot of my magazine training, and it would try to have text and pictures talk to each other in a way that was a little unusual. And I would learn the answer to my problem, which is how the hell did they do this?
Eric, who, by the way, is such a wonderful guy, and just before we walked over here, we're over in the rare books part of this. If you haven't been, it just kind of blew both of our minds.
God, yeah.
And reminded us, he did, of the really important history of American literature is that it often starts in periodicals, that it starts in magazines, whether it's Melville, whether it's Poe, others. The great works that we know as enshrined in books start in magazines. And therefore, you as a magazine editor, even though you're coming to this problem now newly as an artist, right? Mm-hmm. As a painter.
Yes.
But I do wonder how it was for those years before you came to this sort of crisis, I guess, to watch other people, to watch writers, to sort of almost be their doula through the process of making their work in your magazines. What was your observation at that point of what it takes to get somebody like, I don't know, me, to like file a piece, which is really hard.
Yes, it's really hard. It's really hard to be a writer.
Yeah.
I don't know how people like you do it.
You should please tell my mom. Yeah.
I always, I was very happy being a doula. I was enamored of talent and artistry and writers in particular, always. And I felt it was a very, noble calling to create an environment where their work could be published and seen. Writers and artists and photographers and all that are temperamental. It's not always easy to get them to bend to your needs, making a publication. But it came from a place of love on my part. I really, I just revered what they were doing, and never wanted to do it myself. I mean, my whole feeling was that I perform creatively best in a group. There's a chapter in this book about David Simon, who did The Wire, and someone refers to the fact that his creative mojo is through something that they call the bounce, which is it's kind of ricochet action that happens when one idea bounces off another idea, and therefore happens in public. And a writer, an artist, a songwriter, they operate by themselves. That conversation happens in their own head. And so even while magazine writers have editors, and it's a much more intense editor-writer experience than you get, say, in books, typically.
For sure.
It nevertheless is a solitary act, and that was a mystery to me.
Well, one of the sort of, I love how you frame that, this dialectic between the solitary and the public or the collaborative. The first moment often when something becomes collaborative is the moment of revision. You say in this book, and it was terrifying for me as a magazine writer who is, always edited. You say, I appreciate a crude hand. That like there's something about the early effort, the sort of almost the fumbling effort that then becomes the polished work that kind of is attractive to you. What did you learn through talking to these artists about just there's a really great moment with Tony Kushner, who made Angels in America, and Oscar Eustis, who went on to be the great artistic director of the Public Theater, but helped this work of art, Angels in America, into being. And it's like he sends him a bunch of pages, and Eustis is obviously like not into
so
them.
Excited about it.
Yeah. What did you learn about sort of first effort to polished effort, the drama specifically of revision?
Well, I mean, it's often the early primitive effort is the most beautiful. There's there's a chapter in the book about an artist called Cheryl Pope. And I got sent this haunting image of, she makes these felt paintings, and this was a painting of a mother and picking up a child, but it's just very stark. And what I learned when I was completely taken with this image, which was so, it was full of anticipation. It wasn't yet realized, it was beautiful to me. And then I did actually talk to her about the making of this really aching work of art, which was started when she had her third miscarriage and realized that she would not be able to bear a baby herself. And this was a work of getting through her pain, and she had taken in her trauma, she found herself growing a lot of things in the house, just to know that she could grow something. And she found herself leaning over a plant that she was growing, and because she's self-conscious, as an artist, realized that this was the makings of a potentially beautiful piece, the mother leaning over the plant. And the chapter is all about the ways in which that first impulse then turns itself into a work, a completed work, in which she struggles with whether to give the baby a face, a baby that she felt was her own baby, and could she take it to see to create and then to see the face of the child that she wouldn't have, and that whole process is very moving. But that's a long way of getting to your question, which is that the iterative, the empty, the anticipatory moment is actually, to me, the most beautiful. And that's true. I've always found that true. I love a manuscript. I mean, this is my own fetish as an editor. I love a marked up manuscript, but I love a manuscript even more when the writer, her or himself, is marking it up, and you can see their mind at work. You can actually, there's it's actually an action picture. Sorry, am I too screechy? No. Okay. And I just find it moving, and some writers, some artists, amazingly, have the essential thing in their mind the first instant they think it. But others, Tony Kushner is a good example, or George Saunders in the book, or most of them, they sometimes struggle for, in George Saunders' case, we talked about this book called Lincoln in the Bardo, beautiful book. It took him 20 years. He first wrote it as a short story, then he wrote it as a play, until he could figure out how to make way through this wonderful work. And then the revision is almost always to try to bring it back into its purest and simplest form. It's almost always an act of subtraction.
Speaking of that sort of, contingency, that improvisation that happens along the way, another process question, I wonder just what it was like to get writers who are notably squirrely people, and who like to who like to put forward at least a sort of facade of having arrived at the product immediately, right? How was it to get them to give over or divulge the evidence of this process? You have notebook pages from Tony Kushner, his diaries of writing Angels of America, and they're full of doubt. Yeah. They're full of second guessing, and again, a thing I know very intimately, and it's painful almost to read. How did you convince writers to be a part of this project? Well,
I should say that the entire project was loaded. Artists, writers in particular, but all artists, they're kind of loath to talk about how something came to be. They're superstitious. They don't know where this impulse comes from. They're afraid they're going to jinx it. They're going to screw it up if they talk about it. So there was a certain kind of person who was introspective and as curious as I was about how the thing came to be, that said yes to this project. It was a kind of self-selecting project. Anyone I had to talk into doing it was not going to work out because they had to be. It was kind of a collaboration. I mean, even though I was the journalist, it was very much we were doing this together, and it was kind of like therapy. I needed them to get on the couch and to try to burrow. And if they were not inclined to do that, it wasn't going to work. So it wasn't so. Once I had their assent, I basically was riding their own curiosity, even need. to understand where this thing came from for them, which sometimes goes back to their childhood. I mean, it really was like therapy. And sometimes it was, and these notebooks and things like that became kind of maps. And they would look at it and say, oh, yeah. I mean, Louise Glick, the poet, the Nobel Prize-winning poet, who talks to me about a poem called Song, gave me these notes. And this is a poem she really loved. But she didn't know where it came from. And then we looked at the notes together. And she realized that this first line, which opened the whole poem up to her, came from a dream. And she has the record of her writing. She woke up from the dream and wrote the first line of this poem, which is a very ordinary line, actually, if you just looked at the sentence in its isolation. But talking to her, you could see how it led to, it iterated. It created the circumstances which the next line happened, the next line, the next line. I don't mean to say that they're consecutive, because it doesn't work that way at all. But where one thought led to another thought. Tony Kushner, back to Tony Kushner, he refers to the act of making something as picking up breadcrumbs. One of the interesting things to me, there's a lot of, the whole book is like my own observations going to the zoo of these crazy animals and what they can make. But one of the weird zoo-like characteristics of all these people is they always talked about themselves as if they were two people. So there would be one person putting down the breadcrumbs and another person picking them up. Yeah. And that pursuit of associations toward the making of the work was almost always the plot of the story they were telling me.
It's so beautifully put, and is the kind of locus of one of my questions, which is that in this thing of Glick and Kushner, who mentions that, he identifies himself as a Freudian and talks about how he's been in analysis forever.
Yeah.
That there is something about the Freudian and a deep belief in the subconscious that is a thread throughout this book.
It is.
And you pose it almost as an opposition, whether this can be, attributed to this kind of like, some people like a kind of magical thinking or like a spiritualist, idea of the subconscious. And on the other hand, just a constant effort, right. As James Baldwin says, as you point out, like I've known many talented ruins. The talent is not the thing.
Yeah.
I wonder if you learned anything about the workings of the subconscious. Did you believe more in the sort of the gifts that the subconscious can bring to us, or did you come down more in the camp of this is just a drilling job?
No. I became obsessed with this question.
Okay. Yeah. It's evident. Yeah.
Whether this was the subconscious talking or whether it was some kind of being struck from some godly thing without, and it's interesting because Tony Kushner embodies both. He talks about the unconscious, and then he also has this whole riff about this song he hears on the radio as he's writing the play, and that song, it's not a song, it's a piece.
A piece that his mother used as a practice piece
yes.
for her. She was a musician. It's this whole system of serendipities.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That he uses as a kind of tool to understand where he needs to go next in writing the play. Louise Glick, even though she is famously, one of the famous aspects of her biography is that she was severely anorexic, and she spent a lot of years on a shrink's couch. So she's very psychoanalytically oriented, and yet she believes that everything comes to her from or she believed, she's now dead, but she believed that she was struck by some kind of godly lightning bolt, which led her to be able to make the work. And she really, in many ways, just has to wait to be struck in this way, which I'm a very secular person, and so that was alien to me. I had to really work to understand it.
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, I decided it doesn't matter at all. But this distinction that I was wrestling with throughout the book doesn't matter, that basically all artists are mystics. All artists don't know where these things come from, and whether they attribute it to the other world or to attribute it to their own subconscious. It's kind of the same thing. And it's only the first stage anyway. So the first stage of being struck is really, I mean, artists tend to use the word vomit. You know, it's usually they get some set of associations that they have to somehow excavate. They excavate it from their own unconscious or from, whatever, from the sparks from without, and they somehow have access to this, which is itself a very unusual thing, and then they have to lay it all out and look at it, and then they have to judge it. So the first stage is this imagining stage, which is this kind of mystical stage. The second stage is very, it's the mind at work. And it's the mind at work judging what it is that the more instinctual stuff has spewed. They judge it and they create a strategy for it. And this stage is to me, the most interesting stage. It's really what the book's about for the most part. And then there's the craft stage where they have technique in order to do this thing, and they have to really have technique in their bones. They generally have started, these are all very accomplished artists. Not all artists have to do this, but it tends to be that the artists who succeed the most are people who've been doing it a very long time, and for whom the language of their trade, of their art, is like the language that you speak. It happens to them early, and becomes automatic for them, which enable them to produce beautiful things.
Yeah, this issue of things starting early also speaks to, I think, another constant place of inquiry in this book, which is how do you manage your specific kind of suitcase of references? Like, I love the Sofia Coppola chapter of this book, a lot because I enjoy her art and care a lot about it, but also because she's so, and always has been so generous about, okay, I was at this Galliano show, and then I went over to the Met to see the Costume Institute, and then also I was looking at this film, and this Manet painting was then, there's a really wonderful
I love that triptych thing.
panel,
so
this
great,
triptych,
yeah.
this Manet painting, this
became
album cover,
yeah.
and then this shot in her movie. It's like a clear, undisguised reference,
one, two,
really.
three, yeah.
I'm really interested in this because I care a lot about the people that came before me and the writers that matter to me. I'm often trying to, on some level, copy them in various ways. What did you learn about copying through this book?
Well, I learned that basically people copy a lot when they're young. And they're trying to teach themselves how to do something. They're extremely impressionable. There's a chapter, Gregory Crutzen, who's a photographer who does these crazy things. These like
he's my boss at Yale. He's a wonderful guy, and yes, he does amazing things. Yeah.
He does these things which are like movie stills, but there's no movie, so there's no before, there's no after. It's just the still, and you as a viewer supply the context, whatever context you wish, to understand this picture. He feels very almost frustrated by his own visual signature, which is the same as the voice when you write a book,
Sure, yeah.
or a kind of musical voice, or something like this that are like an artist's handwriting. It's not, and that gets formed through these influences. But then, for the most part, an artist has to throw over the influence in order to make the work. But even throwing over the influence is education. It's what helps build their identity and capacity as a creator. So influences are very important. They can also be very destructive if they start to get in the way. I find this in my own terrible painting. I'm sort of deeply, deeply impressionable. And I see a painting I was just up there before, and I was like looking at these Klimt drawings that I loved, and I just found myself immediately like reconstructing this painting that I'm doing right now in the Klimt style, and it was like, oh my God, I could see the destruction that this is going to cause me because I'm too impressionable. And I think, you know, and there's a whole chapter on this, the Wesley Morris chapter, which maybe you're interested in as a fellow critic.
Yes.
And it's really all about within the critical realm, him inhaling and then discarding the influences that caused him to write in the kind of Looney Tunes way he does.
Well, Wesley is this guy Wesley Morris. If you don't know him, he's an amazing writer for the New York Times and other places. And when I first started reading him, is at Grantland. Yeah, he's brilliant. And it's really interesting that there is this mulching. You know, I was thinking of like an insect that sort of takes in nutrients and leaves them behind,
Yeah.
but a sort of system of consumption and excretion that, like, I do think art on some level is. But I also wondered, and this I think goes to the same question about like organization. Mm-hmm. So many of the artists in this book talk about outlines.
Yeah, structure.
And some of them are like, I don't like to keep too much of an outline because I want to stay loose.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
others are, you know, I need to do it so that I can believe, you know.
Yeah.
Was there, I don't know, first of all, do you as a painter, do you feel any specific way about sort of organizing an idea before the brush hits the canvas? Have you arrived at any ideas about this?
Well, for me, it's like I just am not anywhere. I'm still, even in spite of everything I learned from this book, which is a lot, but I don't follow it. I do really understand and believe this need to create the structure of the thing before you do it. It's like you need the voice, you need your own voice as a writer, as a painter, anything like that. And you need the structure. You need to really think through the form of, you know, those people who do this without outlines, et cetera, I admire, but I can't relate to it. But I do feel that, and these outlines are, in fact, some of the most beautiful of these process artifacts.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a, you know, crazy outline by Gay Talese in the making of Frank Sinatra Has a Cold. That is so beautiful. And there's another sort of beautiful one that Nico Muhly does for the, you know, it's sort of a musical outline that he does for a piece he writes that he talked to me about. It's very helpful to have structure. Kara Walker, who is this, well, she's a multidisciplined artist, but I talked to her specifically about this crazy, beautiful, haunting sculpture that she did. Made of sugar. That was briefly in the Domino Sugar Factory in New York. It was a giant sphinx, a kind of mammy sphinx, naked, made of sugar. And she'd been given a commission to make a public work in this old, decaying, and politically vexed sugar factory that they were going to tear down. The developers of this property were going to tear down. And, you know, she was pretty much the first person I talked to. She's also the first chapter of the book. And my own wholly romantic ideas about art is that it's all impulse, or that so much of it is impulse. That's what's magical and great and romantic about it. But it turned out she was like, she so disabused me of this idea because the making of this fantastically effective, powerful piece of art was all essentially like a research project. And she had to figure out what to do in this space, and then she created for herself a PowerPoint of images, isolated images
Yeah.
that she then had to almost like almost like you were going to take a test on this. What do all these things lead to? What do they have in common? And the PowerPoint is what enabled her to get to the idea of this sculpture, and then taking a ride on the subway in New York, she suddenly had the eureka of it needed to be made of sugar in this old sugar factory. But that's its own kind of structural anticipation of the work, and it makes the work. I don't see how anyone can work without it.
It was. I took that as a very covert joke. The name of the sculpture is a subtlety, and in my mind I was like, a PowerPoint is the opposite of a subtlety. It's an obviousness
that had not occurred
or something.
To me. That's great. That's so great. Yes.
But we have a couple minutes before we're going to start. About a minute before we start doing the Q&A portion, where we can hear from all of you. But my last question is maybe I don't know, a sort of autobiographical one. But it seemed to me that the process of, or not autobiographical, a biographical one to you, yes.
Want to talk about my mother?
Yes. It seemed to me that this book, you have talked about artists all the way through this conversation as they, and the third person, and this kind of off to the side. I do wonder if making this book convinced you one way or another, as a painter or otherwise, that you are not just a behind-the-scenes present, but part of this, as you say, tribe of mystics. Did you achieve a certain sort of like identification with these people that you were studying almost anthropologically?
I guess so. There's this whole refrain in the book where people keep saying, but am I an artist? Can I call myself an artist? This question of, can I call myself an artist? Can I call myself a novelist? Can I call myself a songwriter? It perplexed me, and yet I realized that's exactly what I was doing myself, that I was hesitating toward embracing it. It made me understand, listening to all of them made me understand how much artistry, this sounds pretentious and I'm sorry about that, was in the magazine making that I was doing my whole career, that it really did follow the same rudiments, the same basic shape as works that, sort of fine artworks that people did by themselves. But in terms of me as a painter, I don't know. I mean, I think that to call myself an artist would be to set myself up for failure. One of the aspects of I came into the book with this feeling of frustration and more than frustration, kind of torment about why couldn't I make one piece of art that I loved. And then where I came out at the end was to realize that none of these people that I talked to, at the end of every conversation, looking for, I'm a narrative journalist. I was looking for some kind of cathartic ending to these chapters, and I was hoping that they would have some kind of exaltation about the work that they had made, that is so beautiful and so has had such a great imprint on others. And for them, they were like, yeah, and then I was finished. They were indifferent. They were indifferent to the power of it, and they would the next day get up and start again and do another project. And because the obsessive drive that caused them to make the thing doesn't end when you do the thing. It is why they're doing it in the first place. It was they just need to play this thing out. It's just like eating or something. It's a kind of human need for them, and I understood finally what they were talking about, and I understood that that it was the pleasure, or the not even pleasure, the necessity of the work that was the driving force, and I did recognize that in myself, that I really love painting, and it gives me a kind of out-of-body experience that nothing else does, and that itself is the reward rather than the making of the thing. So I guess in that sense, I'm an artist. because I have that same need. But in terms of if you ever saw my work, you'd go, ugh. Maybe you'd go, ugh. But that doesn't matter to me quite as much anymore.
I just think that in a couple of years, maybe at the Midtown Scholar Bookstore, we will be here not for a book event about this book, but an exhibition of
you're kind.
Of Adam Moss paintings. I don't know. It's just a possibility. But great transition for us to maybe move on to audience questions.
That'd be wonderful. If you all could raise your hand, I will bring the mic by. And we are recording it for simulcast, so you'll get to speak into the mic. Just raise your hand and I'll bring it by. You can ask up there. Okay, here we go.
First of all, thank you both for coming out and sharing this with us. Because you're an editor, I was looking at the book and I came to a few questions. First, the order that people are in, because there are many different ways you could have done that, and I'm not far enough along that I've come up with a theory for how you ordered it. The other thing is I'm reading it digitally, and your footnotes, I was not prepared for what that was. It was an asterisk in brackets. And at first I thought, oh, this is just explaining something. I already know that. I don't need to click on this. So it was late in like the second or third chapter that I did, and that it was a big footnote. So, but sometimes it's like, well, you could have put that into the body of the text.
Yeah.
What became the footnote?
And what became the text?
And what became the text and what didn't even merit putting in. And the other thing is there's text in red, which looks like a hyperlink, but then it's not. And I think I may have figured it out. Is the red text just referring to the images?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you read it in physical form, you'd see that there are arrows. The red text delineates a description of the picture, and then there's an arrow that leads you to the picture. And the book was very much constructed with the hope that you wouldn't have to wander from text to picture. Very much my own magazine background was that the two things needed to be kind of equal importance in the storytelling of it. In fact, when I had started the book, my hope, which was insane, was that the images would just tumble from the text. So in other words, when you were speaking about, Tony Kushner had this dream, the sentence would stop. You'd see the image, and then it would pick up the sentence after that, so the whole thing would work like a pictograph. That's what I wanted. That's not what's possible in a finite book, and even what's possible in a digital book. I do recommend that you take a look at the physical book. I wouldn't dissuade anyone from reading the electronic book, but it's a very different experience. I do love just the fun toy of the way footnotes pop up. The footnotes answer is that I wrote this book, and I wanted to let the artist speak. It was like my own. I have, been the, doula, rather than the main event. I was very reluctant to impose myself on this book, and somewhere in the middle of the writing of it, I gave it to a friend to read, who's an editor, and she said, "Where are you in this book?" And I went back. I realized she was exactly right, and I rewrote the book at that stage. And I rewrote the book so that the footnotes were as important as the text itself. So the footnotes are a kind of conversation with the artists and a conversation with the reader, and they're a significant layer of the book. So they're not just information; they're asides. They're like little bits of memoir. There are all sorts of crazy things which are similar to the ways in which when I used to work on a manuscript, I used to write stuff in the margin, and this is kind of my own marginalia, but it's a lot of the book. So the third thing is in a way my favorite question, because what is the order? So the order, honestly, is just what felt right to me. And there's a certain amount of separating I didn't want to put playwright with playwright or songwriter with songwriter. There's a certain amount of pacing for visual variety, all of that. But I did write it in order. I mean, I didn't write it in order, but I did write it in order for it to be read in order. Nobody reads it in order. It's not. It sort of defies human, the kind of human impulse. People go to the person they're curious about, the person they know. That's just the way it is. My editor told me that. She said, "Stop writing this way." She said, "Nobody is going to read. Don't refer. Refrain from referring in one chapter to something that happened before, because the reader is not likely to have encountered it that way." So I had to write, but I still wanted to for myself. So it's one book if you read it in order. It's a completely other book if you, and not completely. It is a somewhat different book if you read it in parts, and that's fine with me. But it's written both ways. So you can dive in anywhere you want, or you can, look for the weird associations I have as they build up along the way.
Fascinating. Okay.
Thank you both for being here. It's very nourishing for us. You talked about looking, when you took up painting, for a book that would somehow reveal this process, and found that there wasn't one, so you had to write one. Were there some that came close?
You get bits and pieces. I mean, one of the things that moved me to write this book was looking in a monograph by the painter Eric Fischl, who is a figurative artist, a very interesting artist in my opinion. But he, in the monograph, he talks about probably his most famous painting, a painting called Bad Boy, and he discussed in it what this painting was in each of its layers. And at first it was just a painting of, I can't remember exactly, but I think it was just like a flowers or something, a bowl of fruit. It was a bowl of fruit, and then he put there was a boy in it. He was in the room with the fruit. A boy was in it. Why was the boy in the room? Well, he was there with this woman, and then he draws this woman who is asleep, naked on the bed, and the child eventually is stealing money from this sleeping naked woman. This whole amazing tableau was not there at the very start, and that gave me the notion that actually tracing that evolution might be valuable and interesting. I found that very much. So you see it in isolated places, but never cross-genre. I never saw it cross-genre, and never too much, never much of it. When artists speak, they do have a rap. It's completely, and again, artists, I mean everything. What people really want to know is, what did this mean? I get that. But it's not what I wanted to know. So I wanted to know, how did they do it? And that's not something that I guess people ask very much. It's also something that, as we talked about before, artists are reluctant to disclose. So for both those reasons, they don't really exist.
Great. Please raise your hand. If you got any up on the balcony, I can come that way too.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. Yeah, this is great. How do your paintings come to you?
That's such a good question. No one's ever, in all of my talking about this book, no one's ever asked me that question. They come to me, they come to me by things I've seen, for the most part. I get a visual image. I very much, mostly what I paint is people I know. I'm a figurative painter mainly, and so I paint people with whom I have a relationship. And typically what I do is get the idea that I want to paint them, and then I spend time with them, and I just take pictures of them in various moments. And I then will look very hard at these pictures and then build a painting based on the associations I have from the pictures. They're not typically pictures from the photograph, but they are suggested by the photograph, and I rely on my own, sort of disassociation, looking at the pictures to get an idea about what the painting ought to be. And then I use, because I'm new at this, I use where the light is, and I need some marker of that. The paintings are like, they're kind of abstracted versions of real thing. But I'm also really, I am also really suggestible. So for instance, I started to fall in love with these paintings by this British painter named Frank Auerbach, where they're all just very heavily textured paintings. They're just full of thick paint. And I just decided, okay, I want to paint a Frank Auerbach-like picture, or, I went through a very long period of wanting to paint like Lucian Freud or like Alice Neal. I developed crushes, and they lead me to want to experiment. In some respect, I don't really show my paintings to people. In some respect, every painting I do is an exercise. I now especially feel more comfortable with that they're not really about making a finished work, but learning something by making the thing. And the learning is what gives me satisfaction.
Great. You have a follow-up. Okay.
I'm not sure it's a follow-up. How much editing did your editor have to do for your book?
I would say that the editing I got in the book was very much, there was a line edit, but it wasn't the most significant part. The most significant part was when my editor bought the book. Her name is Ann Godoff at Penguin. And we were talking about who should be in it. She said, she didn't, I thought because they bought the book that she would want the book to be peopled with famous people, because that would make the book more sellable, and figured it was, she's also the president of Penguin. I figured that's what she would want. And she said, no. She said, I want the people who mean the most to you. She said, and I was completely surprised by this sentence, this book is about you. And I hadn't realized at all that that's the book I would have to write, and also in the end would want to write. It's only, I don't want to scare you, it's not really about me, but it's implicitly about me. And so that it was a search book. I was trying to find something out, and that was authentic, that was real. And so that was a profound, the best editors I have found from being an editor, I don't know if you've had this experience, Vincent, are the ones who say something at the beginning of a project that helps shape what that project is. That, restructuring and reworking sentences and all that, that's important and can be very, very helpful. But it's not, it's not really what the partnership is about. The partnership between an editor and a writer, or an editor and anything, is really in setting up what the project will be.
Great. I think we have time for one last question. Okay. Here I come.
Thank you. My question, I'd like to try to tie together a couple threads that you've talked about. So you talked about the creative process as like imagine, and then judging, and then crafting, and then I love that you just said this book started as a search for you, because I'm wondering about the role of uncertainty or not knowing in the creation of a work of art, and what you've gathered about that in your research.
I do think every work is a search. There's one chapter in the book that I really like about a painter named Amy Silman, who's an abstract painter, and she was so generous and gave me all the iterations. I could only publish 39 of them, but there were 100 at least of a single painting that she made called Miss Gleason. And there were just radical changes, shifts along the way, erasures and flame outs and starting over. And it's just, for anyone who is like, who wants reassurance that all artists have doubt, all artists fail, it's very reassuring. So I do think that, while she was doing this, she kept finding things in the work itself. It was a kind of discovery. She finds like body parts, and she finds like parts of herself, and she then erases those parts of herself, and it's a vigorous and in some ways like, you know, unsentimental battle with herself as she's making a piece of work. And so I think that doubt, that uncertainty is a drive. I think drive is a crucial aspect of all of this. But the other thing I want to say is that ultimately, artists have confidence. They can fumble their way to confidence, but it takes an incredibly strong ego to make something. You've got to believe something to say, and you have to believe that someone else will want to respond to it. And that takes a kind of bedrock faith in your own abilities, that even if you struggle, and you will struggle, it's there to be found.
All right, let's have a big round of applause for Adam and Vinson.